I thought she was untouchable. My boss? Sharp, confident, and always in control. But the night she smirked at me and whispered, "Don't call me ma'am. Call me something sweeter," everything between us changed. I still remember my first morning in that office like it was yesterday. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and suddenly I was stepping into a world that didn't quite feel like mine yet. Polished wood floors, glass panels reflecting the glow of city light, the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifting through the air. I told myself to stay calm. Just another job. Just another boss. But the moment I saw her, I knew there was nothing ordinary about this place. She was standing near the conference table, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair, the other holding a folder. Tall, graceful, poised. The kind of presence that makes a room turn quiet without her ever needing to say a word. Her voice carried easily across the space, smooth and measured, as she gave instructions to someone I hadn't met yet. It wasn't just her authority that struck me. It was the quiet confidence in her movements. The subtle smile she gave when she caught a mistake but chose patience instead of sharpness. She wasn't the kind of leader who needed to raise her voice. Respect followed her naturally. And yet, there was something else. The way the light from the wide office windows caught in the strands of her dark hair. The soft clink of her bracelets as she gestured toward a stack of papers. The subtle trace of perfume, warm, elegant, impossible to ignore, that lingered in the air a moment after she passed. I tried to focus on my introduction, but my voice caught slightly as I said my name. She glanced at me then, for the first time, and I felt it like a spark. Her eyes were steady, assessing, but not unkind. Almost as if she was taking measure of me, not just my resume, but the person standing there. "Welcome," she said simply, and the word carried more weight than I expected. The rest of the day passed in a blur of new faces, login passwords, and orientation notes, but my attention kept drifting back to her. The way she carried herself. The way the others seemed to orbit around her, drawn to her calm authority. It should have been intimidating, and in some ways it was, but it was also strangely comforting, like stepping into sunlight after a long stretch of shade. And in those early hours, before I knew what would unfold, before her smirk and her words would shift everything between us, I only knew one thing for certain. She wasn't just my boss. She was someone I wouldn't be able to ignore. Not now. Not ever. It happened on my third day. I was still trying to find my rhythm, figuring out the filing system, double-checking the schedule twice before sending it to her, making sure I didn't stumble over simple things that might make me look inexperienced. She didn't demand perfection, but somehow her presence made me want to get everything right. She walked into my corner of the office that afternoon, a stack of folders in her hand, and asked if I'd finalized the client notes. Her tone was calm, direct, but I felt that same pull I'd noticed on the first day. The way she managed to make even the simplest question feel like it mattered. "Yes, ma'am," I said without thinking. The words just slipped out, natural, automatic, the kind of polite habit you carry from childhood when you want to sound respectful. But the second the word left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. She stopped. Not in a harsh way, not even in irritation, but in that way people do when something catches their attention more than it should. Her head tilted ever so slightly, her lips curving into a smirk that wasn't unkind, but it was sharp enough to cut through the silence between us. "Ma'am?" she repeated, her voice low, almost playful. I felt my ears burn. I didn't mean. Before I could stumble into some clumsy explanation, she closed the folder in her hands, leaned just slightly against the edge of my desk, and gave me that look. Steady, unreadable, but with a spark dancing in her eyes. "Don't call me ma'am," she said softly. Then, after a pause that seemed to stretch far longer than it really did, she added, "Call me something sweeter." The air in the room shifted. It wasn't a command, not exactly. More like a tease, but laced with something unspoken. Her words lingered there, suspended in the quiet space between us, as if she was testing me, waiting to see what I would do with them. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. My mind raced, searching for a response that wouldn't sound foolish. But she didn't give me the chance. She simply pushed the folder across my desk, straightened her posture, and turned to leave. Her smirk stayed with me long after she walked away. I tried to shake it off, bury myself in work, convince myself it was nothing more than casual humor. But every time I looked at the neat handwriting in those notes, I could hear her voice again. Call me something sweeter. And I couldn't help but wonder if it had been a joke, or if, just maybe, she wanted me to see her as something more than the title on her office door. The days that followed carried a different rhythm. It wasn't obvious at first, but there was something in the air between us. A subtle current, invisible but impossible to ignore. She hadn't brought up that moment again. No mention of the smirk, no reminder of what she'd said. On the surface, everything remained professional. She reviewed my reports, gave feedback with the same calm authority, and carried herself with that same quiet command. And yet, the edges had softened. The first time I noticed it was during a meeting. I was fumbling through a presentation, rushing my words, certain I was about to trip over the numbers. She interrupted, not sharply, but with a single glance. Her eyebrow lifted, her smirk tugging at the corner of her lips, and suddenly my chest eased. She didn't say much, just, slow down, you've got this. Her voice wasn't just reassuring, carried a warmth that slipped under my skin. After that, the banter began. Little things at first. She teased me for the way I scribbled notes in the margins of everything, said I wrote like a detective piecing together a mystery. I teased her back about the endless cups of tea she brewed, wondering how someone so sharp could drink something so gentle. Her laugh. God, her laugh. Low, warm, unhurried. It wasn't the kind of laugh that filled a room. It was the kind that slipped into your chest and stayed there, steady and soothing. Every time I heard it, I felt like I'd won something. Sometimes our hands brushed when she passed me a file, and though the touch lasted less than a second, it echoed longer than it should have. I tried not to let it show, tried to tell myself it was nothing, just the ordinary closeness of working side by side. But my heart always betrayed me, beating harder than it had any right to. And then there were the looks. Not constant, not even deliberate, but real. I'd glance up from my screen and find her watching me, her expression unreadable. Not judgmental, not cold, just curious. Like she was measuring something about me that went beyond spreadsheets and deadlines. The strangest part was how natural it felt. I should have been nervous. She was my boss, after all. The line between respect and something more was one I never wanted to cross carelessly. But with her, the boundary wasn't a wall. It was more like a doorway, left slightly open. I didn't step through it. Not yet. But I couldn't ignore the way she left it ajar. Inviting, waiting. And with every shared smile, every quiet laugh, every brush of her hand against mine, I knew we were both pretending it was only banter, when deep down it was something far sweeter. It was a Thursday evening when the office finally fell quiet. Most of the team had left hours earlier, their laughter and footsteps fading down the hall, leaving only the low hum of the air conditioning and the faint glow of desk lamps. I was still at my desk, polishing up a report I hadn't quite finished, when I noticed light spilling from her office. Through the glass, I could see her, seated, shoulders slightly slumped, one hand resting against her forehead as if she was holding the weight of the entire day there. Something about the sight felt unusual. She wasn't the woman I'd come to know in the daytime. Sharp, confident, composed. No, this was different. There was no audience now, no staff waiting on her decisions, no clients watching for her approval. Just her, alone with the silence. I hesitated before knocking softly on the doorframe. She looked up, startled at first, then softened when she saw me. "You're still here," she said, her voice quieter than usual. I smiled faintly. "Could say the same about you." For a moment, the corners of her mouth lifted. But then she sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Sometimes it's easier to stay late than go home. Here, at least, there's work to distract me." Her honesty surprised me. She didn't usually share personal things, not openly. I stepped into the room slowly, careful not to intrude, and leaned against the doorframe. "You carry a lot," I said gently. Her eyes flickered to mine, sharp but not defensive. More searching. "Comes with the title," she murmured. People expect you to have all the answers, to never be tired, to always know what to do. And the truth is, sometimes I don't. The vulnerability in her words caught me off guard. It wasn't weakness, far from it. It was strength, the kind that comes from admitting you're human. I moved closer, pulling a chair from the corner and sitting across from her. "That's not a flaw," I said quietly. "It's the part that makes you real." For a long time, she didn't answer. She just studied me, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them, the desk lamp casting a halo of gold across her hair. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "You're easy to talk to." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, yes, charged with something I couldn't name, but it wasn't the kind of silence that demanded to be filled. It simply existed, wrapping around us like a fragile thread. In that moment, she wasn't just my boss. She was a woman sitting across from me, tired and honest, letting me see the cracks in her armor. And the longer I looked at her, the more I realized I wanted to be the person she could lean on, even if only for a little while. The night of her confession lingered in my mind long after I went home, but it was the next evening that something shifted. Once again, the office had thinned out, leaving only the hum of machines and the glow of city lights filtering through the tall glass windows. She was closing her laptop when I passed by her door. I hesitated, unsure if I should say goodnight or keep moving, but she looked up at me and smiled. Tired, genuine, and a little softer than her usual expression. "Heading out?" I asked. She nodded. "Finally. And you?" "Just finishing a few things." She gathered her bag and papers, then stepped closer, stopping near my desk. "You've been doing well," she said, almost offhand, though the warmth in her tone made it feel more like a gift than a comment. "Thanks," I murmured. "Means a lot, coming from you." Her eyes lingered on mine a moment too long, and the silence between us grew heavy. I could feel the weight of her attention, and I wasn't sure if it was encouragement or something else entirely. And then it happened, small, fleeting, but enough to send a rush through me. She reached out as if to touch my arm, fingers hovering just inches away. For a heartbeat, I thought she'd let them rest there, thought I'd feel the warmth of her hand steady against me. But just as quickly, she hesitated. Her hand paused, then slowly retreated, folding instead around the strap of her bag. It was nothing, a second, no more. And yet my body felt like it had memorized the almost touch, the phantom heat of her palm, the pull of what might have been. She must have sensed it too, because she cleared her throat lightly and looked away. "I should get going," she said, her voice steadier than her eyes. I stood automatically. "Let me walk you out." We moved side by side through the dim hallway, our footsteps echoing softly against the polished floor. Neither of us spoke, but the silence wasn't empty. It pressed against us, full of words we weren't brave enough to say. When we reached her car, she unlocked it and turned back to me. For a moment, it felt like the world had narrowed to just that parking lot. The cool night air brushing against us, the faint hum of distant traffic, and the soft closeness that neither of us broke. She smiled faintly. "Good night." "Good night," I echoed, though the word caught in my throat. She slipped into her car, and I stood there longer than I should have, watching her taillights disappear into the night. My chest ached with something I couldn't name, but I knew one thing with startling clarity. The space between us wasn't empty anymore. It was charged, alive, and sooner or later one of us would have to cross it. For days after that night in the parking lot, her almost touch replayed in my mind. I told myself to focus on work, to bury it under spreadsheets, phone calls, and deadlines. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget the way her hand had hovered near mine. The closeness of it, the quiet restraint that spoke louder than an embrace ever could. She carried on as if nothing had happened. Professional, composed. Her smirk appeared now and then during meetings. Her laughter still found me in unexpected moments. But she gave me no sign of what lingered beneath the surface. It wasn't until a week later that the line between us shifted. We were reviewing a proposal late in the afternoon, papers spread across her desk in neat stacks. The office was quieter than usual, the kind of stillness that makes you aware of every sound. The ticking clock, the soft scrape of her pen, the rustle of pages. I was leaning over her desk, pointing out a figure in the margins, when the old habit slipped again. "Yes, ma'am," I said. Her head snapped up immediately. That same smirk, that same glint in her eyes. "Really?" she said softly. "After I told you not to?" I froze, flustered, half a smile tugging at my lips. Force of habit. She tilted her head, studying me, her gaze steady and unreadable. "Habits can change," she murmured, "especially when you want them to." For a moment, the air felt too heavy to breathe. My heart thudded, loud enough that I was certain she could hear it. And then, before I could overthink it, I let the words slip free. Not rehearsed, not polished, just honest. "You're right. You deserve sweeter." Her expression softened instantly. The smirk gave way to something warmer, almost tender. She didn't speak. She just watched me, as if memorizing the way I'd said it, the way I looked at her when I did. Then her hand moved slowly, deliberately this time. No hesitation. She reached across the desk and laid her palm over mine. The touch was light, almost tentative, but steady. Warm. Her thumb brushed once across my knuckles. A small, grounding gesture that sent a current through me stronger than anything I'd ever felt. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. That single touch carried every unspoken word we'd left hanging between us. When she finally pulled her hand back, she didn't retreat in silence. Instead, she let her fingers trail lightly across mine, as if reluctant to let go. "Better," she whispered, her voice barely audible. And in that moment, the line we'd been tiptoeing around for weeks wasn't just blurred. It was gone. After that day in her office, nothing between us felt quite the same. We didn't rush into anything. No grand declarations, no dramatic gestures. But the silence had changed. It wasn't heavy with questions anymore. It was alive with quiet understanding. Every glance carried weight. Every shared laugh lingered a little longer than it should have. And every time our hands brushed, neither of us flinched away anymore. One evening, much like the others, we found ourselves once again among the last in the building. The glow of the desk lamps painted the room in amber, and outside, the city buzzed softly against the glass. She was finishing emails, I was packing up my notes. Neither of us seemed in a hurry to leave. Finally, she stood and closed her laptop. "Come on," she said gently, her tone lacking its usual edge of authority. "Let's get out of here." We walked side by side down the quiet hallway, our steps unhurried. I could feel the anticipation building, not from what had been said, but from what was waiting just outside those doors. When we reached the lobby, she slowed her pace until our shoulders brushed. It was such a small gesture, but deliberate. She was closing the space between us, not avoiding it anymore. Outside, the night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain on the pavement. She paused under the awning, looking at me with a softness that made her seem different, less like the untouchable figure who commanded the office, and more like the woman I'd come to know in the quiet hours, when no one else was watching. "You know," she said, her voice low, "I didn't expect this." I tilted my head. "Didn't expect what?" Her lips curved, the faintest hint of that familiar smirk. But her eyes betrayed something gentler. "That I'd enjoy your company as much as I do." The words struck deeper than I thought they would. I let the silence settle a moment, then answered honestly, "I didn't expect it either, but I don't want it to stop." She studied me as if weighing the risk, the consequence. And then, slowly, she reached for my hand. Not tentative this time, not fleeting. Her fingers slipped between mine with quiet certainty, fitting as though they'd always belonged there. The warmth of her touch spread through me, steady and real. I squeezed her hand lightly, and for the first time, neither of us looked away. We walked together into the night, our steps matching without effort. The world carried on around us. Cars passing, lights flickering, strangers moving through their own stories. But in that moment, it felt like everything had narrowed to just the two of us. And when she leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper, I caught the glimmer of her smirk again. "Sweeter suits me better, don't you think?" And with her hand in mine, I couldn't disagree. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more slow burn romance tales. Share it with someone who believes love can grow in the quietest of moments. And tell me in the comments, what would you have called her? Instead of ma'am? I'd love to know.